Welcome back to True Ghost Vault. Tonight we open the gate to a place the forest tried to forget, but couldn't. Camp Wendigo closed since the disappearances of 1981. 9 gone, no trace, no answers until now, because someone reopened the camp, and something ancient woke with it. It doesn't just take, it remembers, and when it calls, it sounds like someone you love. This is Camp Wendigo closed since the disappearances. And if you hear your name whispered in the trees, don't answer. Story 1. The Wendigo's Whistle. Campers are warned never to whistle after dark. But when one breaks the rule, something ancient answers from the forest. The wind twisted through the pine canopy like a whisper, and I heard it before I recognized what it was, a faint, desperate whistle in the dark. That night I stood rooted to the earth, the echo washing over me in the blackness beyond the camp's perimeter. I had been warned, never whistle after dark. But by the time I understood what I'd unleashed, it was far too late. I arrived at Cedar Ridge Camp under a cloudless July sky, laughter drifting from the cabins, the tang of pine sap, cedar smoke from the bonfire. I was a counselor in training, knew enough to believe most camp legends were just tales told to scare freshmen, and tonight that belief would shatter. The old-timers, the second-year counselors, spoke of the forest boundary as if it were a living thing. They told us if you whistle after sunset, something in those trees listens. At first it sounded like parlor law until we saw the marks. Tiny scratchings in the trunks arranged like tally marks. They said the tally was growing. I dismissed it. I joined the late-night dares around the lake, the obvious one being whistle. Just once. Who would care? When I whistled, the tune came out, sharp, crisp, a hollow twang that rang through the still air. The camp quieted. Crickets stuttered to silence. I closed my eyes and felt the forest inhale. Then an echo returned. It was my own melody, warped. There was something deeper behind it, slower, sliding underneath the notes. I turned expecting a prank. Instead, I saw the forest edge, dark as oil. There was movement there, something tall. Bony limbs rustled across branches. No face, just hollow shadows. The camp whistle, made of old brass, was supposed to keep us safe, to call us in. But what came back was not our counselor call. It was slower, distended, malevolent. My breath came, sharp. I fled. When I reached the cabin doors, every counselor's window was shuttered silent. I pounded on the first door, no answer. Same at the second. The entire row stood dead. I ran to the lake, flashlight shaking in my grip, its beam cutting thin lines across the water. And it was there, that gathering reflection, rippling under the dock. But the silhouette wasn't mine. It was something tall, feral chest, rising with cold breath beneath the boards. And that whistle, my whistle, resounded again, carefully, slow, bass-toned, and pregnant with hunger. I knew then it came for me. I never told them. Not then. Instead, I slept fitfully in the cabin that night, listening to wind sliding through the mesh windows. Each creak of a board sounded like footsteps on the pine needles outside. Campers shifted beneath quilts unaware. The counselors avoided me in the mess hall. They must have heard something too, but none spoke. Next night, I watched the forest. I saw pale shapes between the trees' antlers, atop a head too narrow to be human. Its eyes glowed faint amber in our distant lights. It stalked the perimeter like it owned the place, and maybe it did. It came closer as I watched, slipping in through the dark between tents, investigating footprints, licking clean scraps. No one waking. Whispers in my mind screamed. Could I have invited it? Could one simple whistle call an ancient hunger? I knew the story Wendigo. The flesh-starved spirit of the woods, its whistle, a lure. but I had treated it like folklore. Now each memory felt like a trap closing in. At dawn, counselors found odd tracks around my tent, ash-white footprints, long and misshapen, pointed. I said nothing. My heart pounded just telling you about them now. By the third night, the wind held voices, coughing breath, dying trees humming with some low chant. I kept waking, in sweat. The campsite lights flickered as though assaulted by a breath of wind. A crack echoed out on the trail, thick, heavy branch, snapping. I told myself it was a raccoon or deer, but the shadows confirmed otherwise. I watched as someone, a lanky camper, stumble into view. His eyes were vacant, shifting oddly. He stopped in front of me, without sound. Then he lifted a hand and touched my shoulder. I felt cold through my clothes. I recoiled. He blinked and whispered, "It's waiting for me," and turned away. I followed him. The woods opened into a clearing I hadn't noticed before. A ring of trees burned, at their bases ash-stained. At its center lay hundreds of skeletonized sticks tied in a loose spiral. Like a nest, the counselor's warnings echoed tally marks. I felt dread solidify in my chest. The camper did not return for lights out. The rest searched. I refused to answer questions. Something in me was paralyzed. That night I heard it again, pulling the whistle out of my pocket. The brass was heavy in my hand. I remembered the rules: never after dark. My fingers trembled, aching as if it needed the tune to complete a summoning. Slowly I raised it and blew. The note vibrated straight into my bones. Silence. Then from the trees the answer. Longer, deeper. Pressed behind each syllable was breath cold enough to kill. From the edge stepped a figure, taller than any man. Skinned pale ribs, protruding antlers arcing from its skull. It stared past me, not at me, as if gauging everything beyond. The whistle flew from my hand. I could not move. Branches crackled as it crossed the clearing. My lungs seized. It paused, tilted its head, and the wind stilled. I began to dim darkness creeping under my eyelids. Without speech, it inhaled me. I left camp at dawn. My body stumbled, but my mind stayed tethered to those dark figures. The counselors found the whistle broken in two. No marks on the clearing beneath the burned trees. No footprints besides mine. And yet I remember the cold. I remember the call of that thing answering with a hunger older than blood. I never heard my own whistle again, but sometimes in the quiet of night I catch a faint echo, a warped note drifting from the still air, and I know it's listening. They told the parents he'd run off. Campers sometimes get spooked, they said, especially first-timers, but I saw what was left behind: a half-torn shirt caught on a branch, a gouge in the bark, drag marks into the underbrush. I didn't say a word, not even when I saw the tally carved into the old cedar outside the mess hall, now one higher. At breakfast, no one mentioned the missing boy. Camp carried on, children laughing, counselors exhausted. But there was a tautness in the air, like the stillness before lightning. Every bird call sounded staged. The silence behind it was louder. Later that day, I found the whistle. My whistle, the one I dropped that night. It sat on my bunk, polished, gleaming, as though untouched by weather. I hadn't told anyone I'd lost it, and yet here it was. That evening I threw it into the lake. It sank fast. But that night, I heard it blow again. I didn't sleep. I sat upright on the cabin floor, knees pulled to my chest, eyes wide in the dark. The flashlight's beam trembled as it swept the room. Every shadow stretched too long. Every knot in the wood looked like an eye. Then it came again, the whistle. Hollow, mournful the notes, descending in an unnatural pattern, like speech through a slit throat. It came from just beyond the wall. I rose. Something in me moved that didn't feel like me. My hands lifted. My bare feet stepped forward, out onto the cabin porch. The forest exhaled, pulling me. I crossed the clearing, drawn by a sound I didn't want to hear. But it didn't matter what I wanted. That tune owned something inside me now. The trees thickened. The air dropped to freezing. My breath clouded. Frost clung to branches. And in the snowless July night, I saw bones hanging from the trees. Real bones, picked clean, strung on vines. Each one it rattled when the wind passed. The clearing opened like a mouth. I stepped into it, body numb. Something stood at the center, tall, brittle, barely human. Antlers spidered from its skull, its jaw unhinged in a crooked smile that stretched past the limits of anatomy. It didn't move, but its whistle did. From its chest came the tune, deep and rolling, a reverse melody of mine. I felt it vibrating through the roots beneath my feet. My skin crawled like insects had colonized beneath it. Then it spoke, not aloud, but through memory. It showed me the boy wandering. It showed him breaking the rule. It showed his soul, pulled apart into ribbons of light, devoured, leaving only a husk. And it whispered, "You called me." I fell to my knees. It crouched. Those black eyes had no iris, no soul, just a mirror of every wrong thing I'd ever done. And then I understood every whistle wasn't just a sound. It was an offering, a summons, a pact. And I had paid, not with my life, but with someone else's. I woke on the dock, face pale, lips cracked from cold. The lake lapped softly beneath me. My feet were clean, my hands trembling. And in my pocket, the whistle. I threw it again, farther this time. But it didn't matter, because later that day, another camper whistled. Just once, a playful little tune as he ran down the hill. And I watched the forest exhale. I heard the echo, and I knew what would happen next. They found his shoe first, mud-caked, torn at the heel halfway down the northern trail. The search began with flashlights and shouting, whistles around necks, radios clipped to belts. Counselors fanned out, calling his name. But the woods didn't echo. It swallowed sound, softened cries. It had done this before. I didn't join the search. I sat on the cabin steps, eyes locked to the tree line. I knew better. He wasn't lost. He had been taken, claimed. The tune still buzzed in my ears, faint and uneven, like static crawling up my spine. The whispers started again that night. In my dreams, I stood at the edge of the forest. Before me, antlers. Behind me, voices, campers, parents, people I'd known. Each begging, screaming. I turned to them. They were faceless. And when I faced the woods again, it was there, tall, draped in sinew and shadows hollow, where a heart should be. It raised a finger, pointed to me, then placed that finger to its jagged lips. Shh! I woke up screaming. The camp went quiet after that. No campfire songs, no ghost stories, no nighttime hikes. The senior counselors held hushed meetings behind locked doors. The director made calls, voice shaking. Rumors ran wild among the kids, bears kidnapping even aliens. But I saw the marks, 3 fresh ones, etched deep into the cedar by the archery range. I tried to speak with the others, to confess, to admit what I'd called. But my throat dried every time I opened it. My tongue stiffened, my jaw ached. Like something inside me refused to let go. Instead, I wrote it all down, in my journal. Everything, the whistle, the shapes, the cold. I buried it under my mattress, sealed in plastic, hoping someone would find it later. If I didn't make it, because I knew I wouldn't. Not after that dream, not after what came next. That night, the cold returned. July still, but frost rimmed the windows. Campers stirred under blankets. A girl sobbed in her sleep. A boy mumbled through clenched teeth, "Please, make it stop." Then came the whistle, loud this time, clear, not near the cabins deeper. And worse, it wasn't alone. Another followed it, fainter, then another, and another, each a different pitch, a chorus of mimicry, a melody built from stolen voices. Something was calling from all around. I grabbed my flashlight, ran. I didn't stop when I hit the woods. I ran toward the sound, toward the clearing I swore I'd never return to. My boots crushed undergrowth, trees whipped past. The night clung to my skin. The air smelled of iron and rot. The clearing glowed with the faint bioluminescence now. Bones lit from within. Ash shimmered like snowfall, and at the center it stood again. But it wasn't alone. They were all there. The missing ones. Boys, girls, counselors, pale, hollow-eyed, walking in slow circles around the Wendigo like dancers in a ritual, their lips chapped, hands blistered. They whistled in perfect mechanical unison. The Wendigo turned toward me, and this time, it smiled. Its smile wasn't a gesture of joy or welcome. It was hunger, a slow creeping unhinging of what remained of its face lips peeled back into a split grin, teeth not so much sharp as broken, splintered like dry wood. Each breath it exhaled curled in the air like steam rising from blood. I couldn't move, not because I was frozen with fear, though I was, but because something held me. The forest itself. Roots curled around my ankles, dirt hardened over my boots. I was a part of the scene now, a guest or an offering. The dancers turned. In that moment, I realized they weren't fully gone. Their eyes flickered with memory. Some tried to speak, but no voice came, just breath, just the hollow, mechanical whistle, like lungs forced to mimic wind through a reed. I recognized one of them, the first boy, the one who whistled after me. His lips were torn, mouth swollen from whistling too long. His fingers were broken at the knuckles bones, jutting where skin should have healed, but his eyes locked on mine, and he mouthed something, "Run." But I couldn't. The Wendigo raised its arm. Bones creaked beneath thin, stretched muscle. It pointed to the ground in front of it. The meaning was clear. Join. I shook my head. Its smile widened. Behind me, a chorus of footsteps rose. I turned just enough to see other campers emerging from the shadows. Not dancers, real ones. Awake, drawn by the sound, sleepwalking in clusters, their eyes half open, their hands limp. They moved toward the clearing like insects drawn to flame, and I knew if I stayed, it wouldn't just be me. I fought the roots. They groaned as I pulled skin tearing at my heels. I screamed. The forest didn't care, but something in me did. That tiny part not yet swallowed. I screamed again, louder than I'd ever screamed before, and something shifted. The boy who mouthed "Run," he turned, faced the Wendigo. He stepped out of the circle. It howled, not a sound, but a soundlessness, like silence becoming violence. The dancer burst into flame. No smoke, no scream, just light. And in that second of distraction, the roots cracked. I stumbled free. I grabbed the nearest camper, small, maybe 10, and dragged her by the wrist, back through the trees, through thorns, through the cold. I didn't stop until the lights of the mess hall shimmered between the branches. I didn't stop until I collapsed in the dirt, holding the girl as she shivered awake, whispering, "Where? Where am I?" And behind me, deep in the woods, the whistling stopped. They shut the camp down the next day. No explanations, no answers. Parents arrived in droves. Children were packed. The director resigned without speaking a word, but they never found the others. They searched for weeks. The police found nothing. The forest swallowed its debt, satisfied for now. I tried to forget. I moved cities, changed numbers, burned the journal. But last winter, I heard it again. Outside my apartment window, just one long, low whistle. Familiar, impossibly close. It didn't belong to anyone I knew, and when I checked my coat pocket, the whistle was back. Waiting, breathing, and it was still cold. Even now, if you listen closely, you might hear it whisper your name. Story 2. Midnight. Howls from Wendigo Ridge. They said the howls were just wolves. The counselors at Camp Echo Pines passed it off with lazy shrugs, the way people do when they're afraid but too tired to admit it. Coyotes, maybe they'd mutter, eyes not quite meeting yours. Nothing to worry about. But no one ever looked toward the ridge after sundown. And no one, not even the boldest staff member, dared climb Wendigo Ridge past dusk. That was the rule. We didn't question it until the third week of July, when the howls changed. Longer, deeper, human almost. Not crying out, but calling. That summer, there were 7 of us counselors, all aged out of our teen years, but not yet hardened by the world. It started with Nate, our unofficial leader, full of jokes and stupid courage. Then Ella, quiet and sharp-eyed. James and Petra, inseparable. Mia, who always stayed too long at the campfire. Rachel, the skeptic who didn't believe in anything. And me, Daniel, documenting everything like I always did. Because when you write it down, it feels real. And if it's real, you can survive it. At least that's what I told myself. The night we decided to go, the moon was a sickle barely hanging. Mist hugged the ridge like a blanket. There were no campers that week. Some scheduling fluke had left us with 2 full days before the next batch arrived. That meant free nights, no curfew, no rules, and no one to stop us. I still remember the way Nate grinned in the firelight, the way shadows cut across his face like teeth. "Let's go find out what's making that noise," he said. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Yeah, sure. Let's chase scary sounds up a mountain. Classic horror movie decision." But we went anyway. Because when you're young and invincible and wrapped in the safety of your own disbelief, even a howl from the dark feels like a dare. We packed lightly headlamps, water bottles, 1 emergency flare. The trail leading up the ridge wasn't forbidden, just avoided. Too steep, too rocky, too easy to twist an ankle, but we hiked it anyway. The trees narrowed around us, branches interlocking overhead like rib cages, choking off the sky. The first howl came just after midnight. It started as a low vibration in my chest before it hit my ears. Like thunder, buried beneath the voice. It didn't echo, it slithered. We all froze, even Nate. It was close, closer than any of us expected. James broke the silence. "That wasn't a wolf." No one disagreed. Ella pointed to the path ahead. "We're not turning back." The air shifted as we climbed higher. The wind died. The birds stopped. The forest didn't feel like forest anymore. It felt like a lung. Like we were crawling deeper into something alive and sleeping. When we reached the ridge plateau, we saw them. The stones, arranged in uneven circles, flat, heavy, slick with moss, despite the dry weather. And in the center, a massive wooden effigy antlers rising from a skull carved of rotted birch, its limbs bound with sinew. No eyes, just a hollow where its face should have been. No one spoke. Nate laughed first. "Jesus, this place is nuts." But Mia stepped back. "There's something wrong here," she whispered. We all felt it, the weight of being watched. The way the wind moved now, in short, strangled bursts, like a dying breath. Rachel snapped a photo. The flash lit the woods. For a split second, everything was white and hard and sharp. And then we heard the second howl. This one was closer, too close. Below us, and behind it something dragging, like bones over stone. We ran, not in a pack, not smart, scattered, crashing through brush and roots sliding on loose gravel. I lost my footing twice, skinned my hand. The woods weren't woods anymore, they were a maze of black limbs and clawed bark. I screamed for the others. No one answered, just that sound again, dragging, wet, like something tall and hungry, pulling itself upright. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead, alone. The silence when I stopped wasn't relief. It was pressure, like a sound that should be there had been ripped out of the air, leaving a vacuum behind. I turned in slow circles, headlamp flickering across Saita's trunks. Nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. No wind. Just trees standing too still, like they'd grown afraid to move. I called out, voice raw, "Nate." No answer. "Mia, James." Still nothing. My lungs ached. I crouched behind a fallen log, forcing myself to slow down, to breathe through the panic boiling in my throat. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen any of them. Nate had sprinted left. Mia had stumbled behind. I remembered Ella's hand brushing mine just for a moment and then slipping away. There had been a shape in the trees, something towering, moving between trunks without sound. No footsteps, no snapping branches, just motion, slow and steady. I kept my light low now, just enough to see a few feet ahead. My legs shook with each step. My thoughts tangled and frayed. What was that effigy? Why was it built? Who came here before us? Because someone had, and they hadn't come back. I walked for what felt like hours. The trail forked twice, the markers gone. Every turn looked the same. Bark bleeding sap. Rocks covered in mossy symbols I didn't recognize. And then I saw the flare. Red smoke. A single shot up through the canopy. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I reached the clearing where it had fired from and stopped cold. The trees were wrong here, twisted, warped like they'd grown through heat or rot. One leaned entirely over its trunk, curved into a noose shape. At the center, Petra stood alone, her face pale mouth twitching. She didn't speak, just pointed, and there, half buried beneath the roots, was James. His body was intact, his eyes were not. He looked as though he'd been staring into the sun for hours. Dried blood ringed his sockets. His mouth was stretched in an awful O-lips, split at the corners. Petra knelt down beside him. "I couldn't stop it," she said. Her voice was cracked, like she'd been screaming for days. It came from the trees. It didn't touch him. It just looked, and he looked back. I wanted to run, but I didn't. Because behind Petra, rising slowly from the hollow, was something I couldn't name. Antlers. A face like bone and rot. Eyes that weren't eyes at all. Just voids. And it was smiling. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice collapsed into the back of my throat, buried beneath instinct and terror. Petra still knelt there, as if paralyzed or in trance. The thing behind her towered impossibly tall, its limbs contorted, like broken marionette strings, jerking slowly with every breath. Its ribcage expanded and contracted, skin drawn so tight, it looked carved from leather. Then it tilted its head, not at Petra, at me. It had no mouth, only a cleft in the bone where a jaw should have been, but somehow I felt it smile deep inside my skull, a pulse of dread that wasn't mine. An emotion pushed into me like a needle under the nail. I took a step back. The forest bent with it. Every tree seemed to curve subtly in my direction, branches creaking low like bowed heads. The ground itself felt uncertain, like stepping across a buried lung. I whispered Petra's name. She turned slowly. Her face was blank, drained of color and thought. Her eyes weren't Petra's eyes anymore, just wet marbles, reflecting the red flare smoke still hanging in the air. "She saw it," she said softly. It lives inside the silence. It's the space between the howl and the breath. And then she stood, unsteady, and walked toward the thing. It didn't move, not at first. It only opened its arms, wide, like a parent greeting a child, and Petra folded into them, flesh against bone, like she belonged there, like she always had. The sound of her body pressing into it wasn't violent, but it was wrong. Too soft, too quiet. Then the forest went dark. Not night dark, pitch black. Like the ridge itself had shut its eyes. And in that absolute absence of light, I heard it again. The howl. But this time it wasn't distant. It was behind me. I ran. The forest closed in like a lung collapsing. Every step I took, the terrain shifted routes where there had been none, rocks where the path had once been clear. My legs burned, lungs clawing for air that had turned thin metallic, like I was breathing rust. Branches whipped my arms and face, stinging like lashes, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The howl behind me wasn't a sound anymore. It was pressure, a low vibrating force that pushed through the trees and into the meat of my spine. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew a way. Then I saw it firelight, flickering through the trees, like the promise of safety. My legs moved faster than my thoughts. I crashed into the clearing and froze. It was the same ridge plateau, the stones, the effigy, but the fire. It wasn't ours, it was theirs. 6 figures stood around the effigy heads, bowed lip moving, but making no sound. The fire cast no heat, no smoke. It burned with a color I didn't recognize. Something between orange and bone. They turned toward me in unison. Nate, Mia, Ella, Rachel, Petra, even James, his hollow sockets weeping ash. Their mouths opened, and the howl came not from behind me, but from them. A chorus of voices stretched wide across time and breath and bone. It wasn't pain. It wasn't rage. It was invitation. My legs gave out. I dropped to my knees, hands sinking into the dirt. The wind lifted, and the flames bowed toward me. Something moved inside of the effigy. I saw it now. Not wood, not fully. Rib cages stitched with wire, teeth set into knots of pine and scalp. A face, a real one, buried in the bark, eyes open, lips trembling. Still alive, still watching. The antlers weren't decorative. They were grown. My body trembled. The figures stepped forward. Their mouths moved in perfect unison. We brought it down the mountain. We gave it names. Now it needs yours. I closed my eyes and felt it whisper behind my teeth, say yes. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. And that silence was enough. The world tilted. Not metaphorically, the ridge tilted like gravity was being rewritten. The trees bent inward. The stars wheeled in slow spirals above me, forming shapes I couldn't recognize. Circles nested within circles, like eyes blooming across the sky. The fire dimmed, then flared, not upward, but down, pulling into the earth, revealing a hollow beneath the effigy. A pit, carved with symbols smeared in something too dark to be paint. Inside that pit was movement, worming, breathing. The Wendigo crawled upward, not climbing, but unfolding. Its spine cracked like old wood splitting. Its fingers, long hooked, jointed too many times, clutched the edge of the altar as it emerged. Its head scraped the underside of the sky. And when it opened its mouth, I saw teeth, but not inside it. The teeth were around it, lining its shoulders, its belly, its arms, like mouths that had never stopped growing. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The others knelt. Their eyes glowed faintly, milky, and ruined. They began to hum, and the humming was wrong. Notes that shouldn't exist. Music that felt like it belonged in dreams. You don't survive. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled again. Something pressed down on my chest, an invisible weight. Or maybe my name being pulled from me, syllable by syllable. I reached into my jacket. The flare. My hand found it. I didn't think I acted. Scraped the cap. It sparked, burst red, a single brilliant flame against the darkness. The howl cracked, interrupted. The ridge screamed. Not just the creature, the mountain screamed. The trees twisted, as if recoiling. The fire sputtered. The figures cried out, shielding their eyes. And the Wendigo, it looked at me, truly looked. And for the first time, I saw what it really was, hunger-made form. It didn't hate. It didn't rage. It needed, and it had chosen me. I hurled the flare into the pit. The light struck the effigy, and everything burned. The fire wasn't like before. This time, it roared. It consumed not only the effigy, but the very air around it. The howl turned into a shriek, splintered, unnatural, like the death rattle of something too old to die. Flame peeled across bark and stone, licking the moss from the ridge like skin. The altar cracked down the center, spilling embers into the hollow earth below. The Wendigo didn't flinch. It stared at me through the blaze body, engulfed but unmoved. Its antlers glowed like iron pulled from a forge. The mouths across its torso opened in silent agony. Exhaling smoke, steam, voices, the names of every soul it had devoured. And I heard mine, twice. Once from its chest, and once from the forest behind me. I turned Rachel. She wasn't part of the circle. She hadn't spoken. Her eyes were wide, wild alive. Her shirt was torn, smeared in ash, and she was holding another flare in trembling hands. "You lit it," she said. Her voice cracked. "You lit it. I choked. We couldn't let it." But her eyes shifted past me. "Run." I didn't argue. The two of us ran like animals. Fire followed us. Not flame, but the sound of it, the roar, the low growl beneath, the wet shuffle of something enormous pulling itself through the trees. The Wendigo wasn't dead. We hadn't killed it. We'd woken it. We barreled downhill, tripping, scraping, bleeding. The trail had shifted, warped, but we didn't stop. Not even when we heard Ella scream behind us. Not even when we passed Nate's boot. Alone, upright, still warm. By the time we reached the lake, dawn had broken. The sky above Camp Echo Pines was painted in shades of gold and bruised lavender. Smoke curled from the ridge, but the howls were gone. The silence was not comforting. It felt like something holding its breath. Rachel fell to her knees by the water, coughing, sobbing. I knelt beside her, blood crusted in my hair, eyes raw from smoke. Neither of us said anything for a long time. We knew the others were gone, but not lost. Not really, because Wendigo Ridge doesn't take, it keeps. And sometimes when the wind is just right, the mountain howls again, and the voices sound familiar. We stayed until the rescue teams came. That afternoon, the director returned with forest rangers and 2 unmarked men in dark clothing. They didn't ask many questions, just took notes, marked trees, scanned the ridge with the long black scopes that clicked and hummed. I told them everything. Rachel didn't speak at all. She just sat on the dock, staring at the tree line, mouthing names that no longer had bodies. I heard her whisper to them, Nate, Ella, Mia, Petra, James. Again and again, like a prayer no God wanted. They didn't find the altar. The fire had scorched the ridge clean. No symbols, no stones, no bones, just ash. And something worse, no footprints. It was like nothing had ever stood there, like nothing had ever burned. But I knew better. We left Camp Echo Pines that night. The place was shuttered a week later, officially, for environmental risk after a rockslide incident. The report said the missing staff had gotten lost in the backcountry. Tragic, unexpected, unavoidable. No mention of the Howls, no mention of the Wendigo. But I've heard them since. Every July, just after midnight, sometimes in places far from that mountain, sometimes when the wind cuts too sharp and the night air feels wrong in your lungs. They come like a memory you didn't know you had long, ancient. Calling, claiming, and last summer I heard them again, but this time from inside the woods behind my apartment. 3 short howls, and 1 long. The same pattern, the one we heard the night they took James. I looked out of the window, and under the moonlight I saw antlers, tall, still, watching. Even now, if you listen closely, you might hear it whisper your name. Story 3, The Last Camper of 73. The first time I heard the voice, it came from across the lake, long and cracked, like someone screaming through ice. It was just past midnight, and the moon was high, full, white enough to bleach the treetops. I was the last one awake at Camp Hemlock Hollow, sitting alone on the dock with my feet in the water. The other counselors were drunk, or passed out, or both cabins, breathing slow with sleep. That voice didn't belong to any of them. It wasn't human, not quite. It wanted to be. I froze, my skin prickling, as the cry echoed across the water, low and broken. Help, please. It was a child's voice. That's what made it worse, because Camp Hemlock hadn't had campers for decades. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghost stories. My friends know me as the skeptic, the one who laughs at Ouija boards and smirks at haunted houses. But that night, sitting under the moon, something in that voice reached into me deep, instinctual. It wasn't fear. Not at first. It was recognition, as if I'd heard it before. I turned on my flashlight and scanned the lake's edge where the tree line kissed the shore. Nothing. Just ripples. Still I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then help. I'm cold. Closer now. But no splashes, no footsteps, no rustle of branches. Just that same voice, copied and pasted across the water, like a recording on loop, but slightly off. Slurred at the end. Glitched. I backed off the dock. My pulse throbbed in my ears. That was the first night, and it didn't stop. Every full moon after the voice returned. Always the same words. Always that same dragged-out cry, like it came from lungs filled with freezing water. The other counselors wouldn't talk about it. Not even James, who'd been working Hemlock for 5 summers. He just shook his head and said, "Don't listen too long." Then he walked away. But I needed answers. I started digging. Archives. Old paper records in the dusty rec hall filing cabinets. Most were mold-stained and fading ropes, course logs, meal plans from the 80s, boring stuff. But deep in the back of a drawer, labeled Incident. 1970s, I found it. A single page, yellowed, stamped confidential. July 15, 1973, camper. Name, Simon D. Wexler. Age 11. Status missing details. Last seen at dusk by Campfire Point. No signs of struggle. Search continued for 3 days. Presumed drowned, but the bottom line was the one that made my blood run cold. Body never recovered. Lake never drained. The voice made sense now. Oh no, that's not true. It didn't make sense. But it had context. Simon Wexler, the last camper of 1973. I took the report and stuffed it into my bag, heart hammering. I should have left it to rot in the drawer like everyone else had. But some part of me, The writer, the watcher, the fool needed to know the rest, and I'd find it, even if it drowned me. I kept the report hidden. Every time I looked at it, my fingers went numb. Not from fear, something deeper. Like my body knew what my mind hadn't accepted yet, that the story of Simon Wexler wasn't finished, that the lake hadn't let him go. I started dreaming of water, not just ordinary dreams, immersions. Cold flooded my lungs while I slept, my limbs growing heavy, my body pulled downward by something vast and unseen. Every time I tried to scream, no air, came only silt crawling up my throat like insects. I'd wake up gasping, the sheets damp with sweat, fingernails caked with dirt I hadn't touched. The others noticed I wasn't sleeping. "You okay, Dan?" Rachel asked one morning at breakfast, her voice low. "You look like hell." I lied, said it was a sinus infection. She didn't press, but that night I stayed up again, waited. The full moon returned, bloated, obscene, and with it the voice. This time I recorded it. I stood at the dock, shivering in my hoodie, phone in hand, flashlight pointed across the black sheet of lake. And it came. "Help, please, I'm cold." But something changed. The voice paused after the third call, and for the first time, it added something new. "You heard me last time." I nearly dropped the phone. My flashlight beam shook across the surface. I thought I saw a ripple, just one, spiraling outward from the center. But the water was too still, the moon too sharp. Then I saw it, a shape, kneeling at the edge across the lake. A child's form, head tilted sideways, one arm slack against the ground. No movement, no breathing, just watching. I stepped back. The shape mirrored me, standing slowly, its joints stiff like rusted wire. I ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until I was inside the staff cabin door, locked, phone shaking in my hands. I played the recording. Silence. Just wind. The voice hadn't registered, but in the background, just before I turned to run, I heard something else. Not a voice, a low, wet crunch, like antlers breaking through bark, like bones growing where they shouldn't. I didn't sleep that night, because I knew now Simon wasn't alone in that lake. The next morning, I returned to the filing cabinet, not for Simon's file, I already had that, but to find what came after. Something had to explain it. What had the staff done? Were there reports, records of others hearing the voice? But the drawer was empty. Not just missing files cleared, scrubbed down to metal. I ran my hand inside and felt only rust and wood splinters. That was when I noticed something carved into the back wall of the drawer, almost invisible under decades of grime. It wears his face. I stepped back so fast, I nearly fell. Later that day, I approached James. He was chopping firewood near the staff quarters, sweat staining his shirt, eyes downcast. "You were here last summer," I said. He didn't respond. "Did you hear it too?" He stopped mid-swing. The silence between us stretched like a wire about to snap. Then, "Don't answer it," he whispered. "I didn't," I said. "You already did." His axe dropped, not from clumsiness, from fear. His hands trembled as he reached into his back pocket and handed me a photo. An old Polaroid, faded, color-drained. It showed the camp lake under a full moon. But in the center of the frame, just above the dock, was a figure. Not a boy. A thing wearing the shape of a boy. Its limbs were too long, knees bent wrong, the head cocked at a broken angle, but the face was clean, smooth, almost human, except the eyes, hollow. James said nothing more, just turned and walked off into the woods. That night I waited again. This time I brought salt. An old superstition maybe, but fear makes you grasp for anything. I lined the edge of the dock with it, a thin white ring around my body. My phone was recording, flashlight steady. The voice came right on time. "Help! Please, I'm cold." Then silence. Then I remember you. And then, for the first time, the shape stepped onto the water. Not walked around the lake, onto it. It didn't sink, just glided forward barefoot, skin pale, and two smooth arms limp at its sides. Eyes black hollows. It stopped 20 feet out, tilted its head, and smiled. "I'm still here." Behind me, a twig snapped, and I realized the voice wasn't coming from the lake anymore. It was behind me. I turned, slowly, as if my body already understood what my mind refused to accept. The dock behind me was empty. No footprints, no breeze. But the voice was there right at the base of my skull, vibrating through my spine like teeth chattering in a glass of water. "I'm still here." The figure on the lake hadn't moved. It remained perfectly still, smiling that dead child's smile. But something had changed. There were antlers now. Faint at first, barely visible in the moonlight. Not attached to the child's head, but growing out of its shadow, curling upward like charred branches. They twitched slightly like Anthony. Sensing warmth, my flashlight flickered. The salt line had been scattered just a little. A breeze, a toe. Something had broken the circle. I backed away, dragging the light with me, heart beating so hard it felt like it would split open. Each breath came sharp, ragged. The phone in my pocket felt like lead. And then, from the trees behind me, Dan. A different voice this time. Not the child's, my mother's. She's been dead for 5 years. I froze. Every hair on my arms lifted. "Dan, come here, sweetheart." A whisper, gentle, impossible. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the shape in the trees. Not my mother. Of course not. It wore her form. Too tall, skin waxy, face half-formed like clay left in the rain. One arm, longer than the other, fingers twitching. And it smiled too. The exact same smile as the boy on the lake. That's when I realized the truth. It wasn't just Simon Wexler. It never had been. The thing in the lake, the thing that answers where's the last voice it consumes. The last face, the last memory someone left behind before they were taken. It had warned Simon, then it found me. And now it was learning me, stealing my memories, trying on the people I loved like masks in a fire. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Off the dock, through the trees, down the narrow trail, to the rec hall, past the rotting canoes and broken lights. I didn't look back, not even when I heard it shout after me, "Don't leave me again." The voice cracked mid-sentence, shifting, becoming mine. The sound of my own voice chasing me through the trees nearly broke me. I'd always thought the fear would be in the seeing, in the monster, the violence, the gore. But this wasn't that. This was something deeper, older, a horror that slid into your thoughts and rewrote the script, took your voice, your shape, your grief, and wore it. I crashed into the rec hall door, shoulder first, slammed it shut, and dropped the heavy iron bolt across the frame. The windows rattled from the impact. For a moment it was just me and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then came the tapping. Not fists, not claws, just a single fingertip, tapping on the wood beside the door. Once, twice, a pause, then 3 taps, quick, rhythmic. I knew that pattern. I used to knock like that as a kid on my mother's door when I had nightmares. It was inside my memory now. I backed away, flashlight scanning the room. Every window a black mirror, every corner a mouth waiting to open. Then a voice, my voice right outside the door. "Dan, let me in, I'm scared." I gritted my teeth. Tears blurred my vision. "No," I whispered. The voice sighed, and then it changed. Slower now, deeper. A hiss dragged through gravel. "You already did." Silence followed, then a long, low howl, not from the door. From beneath the floorboards, I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the wood. Something breathed underneath, scratching, pacing, then a whisper. "There were others before you." I ripped myself away from the floor, scrambling to the back room. The emergency locker. My fingers found the keys in a drawer, trembling, barely working, and I opened it. Inside flares, a small camping axe, a tin of salt packets, and the lake log, buried under faded maps and sunscreen. I yanked it out, flipped to the year 1973. Dozens of names, initials, cabin numbers, all crossed out, except one. Simon Wexler, cabin 9. No line through it, no checkmark, no return date. A note in red ink beside it, written in panicked cursive. "Do not close the file. Do not lie. It will remember." I dropped the book. Behind me, the tapping started again, faster now, all around the building. Not hands, not feet, antlers. The walls groaned under the weight of what was pressing in. Not physical pressure, worse. A kind of memory strain, like the room itself was being forced to remember something it had buried. The antler taps turned into slow, scraping drags across the wood, tracing symbols I couldn't see but felt behind my eyes. The room was shrinking. Or maybe my thoughts were. I scattered salt across the floor in frantic lines, praying the stories were true, that the old ward still worked, that whatever this was still obeyed some law of threshold or tradition. The moment the salt hit the floor, the sound outside stopped. Everything went still. I didn't relax, just froze there on my knees in a ring of salt and moonlight, waiting for the next noise. But none came. Instead, I heard crying. Soft, muffled sobs from the far end of the room, from the supply closet. No footsteps, no door creak, just the sound of a child weeping. I don't want to be alone anymore. My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice. Simon, but this time it wasn't echoing. It wasn't distant or corrupted. It was right here, inside. I rose, knees cracking, flashlight aimed at the closet door. It was shut, latched with an old rusted bolt. The crying continued, rising in small, gasping fits. So human, so real, then a pause, and in a whisper like breath against the back of my neck. "Please." I brought the others back. My hand moved toward the bolt. My body wasn't mine. Fingers numb, I touched the cold iron and slid it free. The door creaked open. And there he was, a boy, 11 maybe, hair wet clinging to his cheeks, skin pale blue, eyes wide and hollow but not empty, not yet. He stared up at me, trembling arms, limp at his sides. "Are you Simon?" I whispered. He nodded, then smiled, a slow, dreadful smile that split his face like paper tearing. And behind him in the dark of the closet, the antlers rose. I stumbled back, but it was already too late. The thing behind Simon unfurled from the shadows like smoke, given flesh, its antlers scraping the frame as it emerged, branching, splitting, twitching. No face, just a mass of bone and bark where a head should have been, mouth of vertical slit that never closed, never opened, just breathed. The boy didn't move, didn't flinch. His smile deepened, and then he spoke, but the words didn't come from his throat. They came from the creature. "You opened the door." The voice was layered, not just Simon's, but others, many others, stacked and stitched together like rotted cloth. Some shrieked beneath the sentence. Others wept. I tried to run, but my legs failed. The salt line was gone, blown away like ash. The wind inside the room had taken it, and now it moved in small, circling currents, whispering over the wooden walls, pulling. At memory, I saw flashes, not with my eyes, with something deeper, a seeing placed inside me by whatever ancient thing this was. I saw Simon running from Campfire Point, the counselors shouting, the thing in the lake standing knee-deep in water, arms outstretched, and the boy Willing walking toward it, tears streaming, whispering, "Please make me forget." Then darkness, no sound, until the full moon returned, and with it the hunger. The creature feeds on stories, on memory, on loss, and it waits for someone to open the file again, to remember, to say the name. I had done that. Simon stepped toward me, and the Wendigo followed. Its limbs dragged behind it like roots torn from soil. Its chest was hollow, split open like a rotted tree, and inside I saw the flickering images of all the others. Faces screaming, mouths wide, names spinning through the air like Ash, Petra, James, Rachel, even me, already there, already trapped. I raised the axe. I don't remember lifting it. I only remember the sound, wet and final, as it sank into Simon's face. His smile never faded. The creature screamed, the kind of scream that doesn't come from lungs, but from history itself. The world cracked. The closet door slammed shut, and I woke in the middle of the woods. Alone, bloodless, breathless. The camp was gone, as if it had never been there. But the lake remains, still, silent, and on every full moon I hear the voice again. Not Simon's, mine, calling from the dock. Help, I'm cold. Even now, if you listen closely, you might hear it whisper your name. Story 4. Camp Wendigo, closed since the disappearances. They reopened Camp Wendigo the year I turned 26. It had been abandoned for nearly 4 decades, locked behind iron gates, and rumors the kind of place that passed into urban legend and late-night dares. People said it was haunted, others said it was cursed, but everyone agreed on one thing. Something happened in the summer of 1981. 6 campers gone, 3 staff. All vanished between the 2nd and the 3rd week of July. No witnesses, no bodies, no explanations. Just blood on the treetops, whispers in the cabins, and silence that stretched too deep to measure. Then the forest swallowed it whole. Until now. I was part of the renovation crew hired to bring it back to life. New owners, big investors, a whole wilderness wellness retreat pitch. They bought the land cheap, no one wanted it, and sent in a handful of us to get it ready for a soft open in the fall. I didn't believe the stories. I should have. We arrived in early spring. Snow still clung to the ground, in places melting into thick, sour mud. The trees were bare, reaching like bones. The lake was black and unmoving, rimmed with cattails so dry, they snapped in the wind. The cabins were worse than expected. Rot in the beams, nests in the rafters, claw marks on the doors. Yes, claw marks, deep ones, too deep for raccoons, too high for wolves. Parallel, uneven. One of the guys, Ben, laughed it off. "Big bear with a vendetta," he said, but I saw the way his hands shook when he touched them. We set up our trailers outside the main gate. No one wanted to sleep inside the camp yet. Something about the air felt wrong. It didn't smell like earth or pine. It smelled like metal, like the inside of a freezer. And the woods were quiet, not empty, silent. No birds, no squirrels, no insects, just wind. And even that came in stuttering, unnatural bursts, like breath. The first week passed slowly. Most of the crew avoided cabin 12, partly because the floor had collapsed, but mostly because of the dark streaks on the ceiling. They looked like water damage, but when I ran my fingers across them, the stain came away red. dry, flaked like ash. I told myself it was paint, but that night I dreamed of teeth. Not mine, not human. Teeth buried in wood. Teeth growing from the trees. Teeth too many, too sharp, too still. And I woke up to find the window of my trailer open, from the outside. The next morning I found hoof prints in the mud, barely formed, like something only half belonged here, and behind them drag marks, as if whatever walked had to pull part of itself behind. Ben said it was deer, but there were no deer in the woods. We would have heard them, and I knew. The forest hadn't forgotten. The next day a fog rolled in, thick, low, heavy enough to muffle sound. It came from the lake like it had a purpose, curling between cabins, swallowing trails. We tried to work through it, shoveling dirt, hauling timber, fixing doors, but everything felt distant, like we were moving through water. Ben wandered off around noon, said he was heading toward the mess hall. He never came back. We searched for hours, yelled his name until our throats cracked. The fog didn't lift, it just deepened. Sound died in it. Flashlights barely pierced it. Then from deep in the trees we heard something. Not footsteps, not breathing. A sound like chewing, wet, slow, rhythmic. We followed it until we found his vest soaked, torn, still warm, and something else, a single antler, snapped in half, embedded in a tree trunk 6 feet high. It hadn't grown there, it had been driven there, like a knife. We reported Ben missing. They said he probably got lost, wandered off. But I saw what the others refused to. The hoof prints had returned, only this time there were more and deeper. That night I stayed awake, didn't light a fire, didn't move, just sat at the window of my trailer, staring into the fog. At 2:12 a.m., the woods howled. Not wind, not wolves. Something long, starved, like lungs filled with ice. I didn't breathe, and through the haze I saw it. Between the pines, tall, thin, crowned with antlers that scraped bark as it walked. Limbs too long, joints bending backward. Its skin was gray, not dead, not alive, like tree bark peeled back. No eyes, just two deep, sucking hollows that pulled in light. And it carried something, dragged it, Ben. But it wasn't his body anymore. It had been emptied, a shell of cloth and bone, still moving, still whispering, not words, but hunger. I shut the blinds and I wept. I didn't tell the others what I saw. How could I? They were already unraveling. Scott had stopped sleeping, twitching at every sound, his hands always dirty, like he'd been digging something he couldn't remember. Laura kept staring at the tree line like it whispered her name. Jeremy wouldn't go near the lake anymore, not after he found the canoe overturned and slick with what he called black moss. It wasn't moss. I knew it wasn't moss. I stayed quiet, but I started marking the nights. 3 full moons had passed since we arrived, each one closer, louder. The second moon, something clawed the side of my trailer. Long scrapes, no pattern, just rage. I found the scratches the next morning, paint peeled, metal warped, as if the surface had melted around the claw. The third moon we heard singing from cabin 12, a child's voice, old, out of time. The melody didn't follow rhythm, it was circular, folding back on itself. A song meant to trap, not comfort. Scott went inside. He didn't come out. We waited until morning. The cabin was empty. No blood, no footprints, just his boots, neatly placed by the door. And a trail of teeth, small and white, leading under the bed. Baby teeth. Human. There were no children at camp. We stopped sleeping inside after that. Just our trailer's locked lights off. We didn't talk much during the day. The woods had taken the sound from us, and then one morning, I found the gate open, the heavy iron entrance we'd welded shut, wide open, dragged outward, not by a person, by something leaving, or something that no longer needed permission to return. The forest was louder that day, not with sound, but with presence. The birds had stopped pretending, and the trees leaned closer than they had before. And I swear to you, beneath the moss, beneath the mud and root and stone, something was breathing, waiting for the moon to rise again. The fourth full moon came like a reckoning. It rose blood red over the lake, massive, too close a weight on the horizon rather than a light. The air turned sour by sunset, like copper and rot. Our flashlights died, one by one, drained of battery and sense. Even our phones refused to turn on, screens flickering before fading to black. Only the wind stayed, and even that came in pulses, like exhalations from something buried just beneath the surface of the earth. We gathered in the mess hall, what was left of us. Me, Laura, Jeremy. No one else. No one dared ask how many were gone now. The numbers shifted, too fast, disappeared like smoke. We blocked the doors with tables, chairs, our bodies. We lit candles, watched the walls, and outside the woods began to sing. Not music, not howls, a chorus. Voices, human ones, repeating a single phrase over and over. We remember what you forgot. Laura began to shake. Jeremy whispered, "It's not the camp, it's the land. It always was." I think he was right. The Wendigo isn't a creature. It's not some legend with a skull and teeth and antlers. That's just how it appears, how our minds try to explain it. But it's deeper, it's place, it's hunger given shape. And it doesn't die. It waits until someone opens the doors again. The candles flickered once, then all went dark. Silence. Then a sound, wet, dragging slow. Jeremy ran. Laura screamed. I stayed frozen, listening. As the door creaked inward, not broken, opened, and something stepped inside. I never saw its full shape, just its hand. Long, gray, starved. Fingers like branches, and in its palm it held my name, spoken in my voice. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can still hear the forest breathing, still feel the earth shifting beneath my feet. And on full moons, I dream of the mess hall doors swinging wide and the Wendigo smiling behind them. I didn't die that night, but I didn't survive either. When I woke, it was morning, but not the kind you trust. The light outside was pale, washed out, like the sky had forgotten how to burn. The mess hall was empty, the doors gone, literally gone. No hinges, no splinters, no sign they'd ever been there. Just open air, and beyond it, the lake, still, mirror-like. Something sat on the dock. I walked toward it, slow, unthinking. My body no longer mine. It was Jeremy's jacket, folded, placed neatly at the edge of the wood. On top of it, a pile of teeth, small, human, arranged in a circle. I looked into the water and saw myself, but not as I was, as I had been. Younger, smiling, a counselor at a camp I'd never worked for. The reflection moved its mouth, but no sound came. Behind it, beneath the surface, the shape began to rise. Not a body, a suggestion. Antlers drifting upward like branches in a slow current. A mouth without lips. Hands without skin. And then I felt it. The calling, the same pull that took the others, that made them walk into the woods, into the hollow. That word came to me suddenly, like it had always been there. The hollow. The space between trees, between breaths, between people. The thing that lives in want, in ache, in the part of grief that never closes. The Wendigo is not a hunter. It's a mirror. It shows you what's missing, then becomes it. That's how it feeds. That's how it walks. Through us, I fled. Through mud and blood and fog and silence. I ran until my legs gave out. I don't remember how I made it back to town. The road was there when I needed it, as if it let me go. Just me, only me, to carry it, to tell it. Because that's the last thing the Wendigo wants. Not just to eat, but to be remembered. Because if you remember it, it remembers you. Even now, when the wind shifts just right, I smell the lake, hear the branches scrape, and somewhere far in the distance, a chorus of voices sings, "We remember what you forgot." Story 5. Blood on the trail markers. They say the mountain howls every summer, always after midnight, always 3 nights in a row. A long, low sound that rises out of Wendigo Ridge like breath from the chest of something sleeping, just beneath the trees. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a wolf. That's what they told us after all. Wolves, coyotes, maybe wind pushing through rock. But you know the sound of an animal. You know when a voice has hunger behind it and when it doesn't. This had hunger, not the kind that eats meat, the kind that eats silence and memory and names. We were 7 that summer, young counselors, not quite kids, not yet dead, inside. We were supposed to prep the trails for the incoming campers, patch up the cabins, repaint the welcome sign. Instead, we found the map, stuffed in a crate behind the storage shed, yellowed, ripped, edges burnt. It was labeled Wendigo Ridge, North Sector. But that wasn't what caught our eye. It was the red marker line scribbled in thick shaking strokes that spiraled into a place labeled only with 2 words, "Do not enter." Nate joked it was a prank, some ghost story left over from the 80s, but I watched Ella's face when she touched the ink. Her fingers recoiled like it burned. That night, the howling started again, and by the 3rd night, one of us was already gone. We thought we were going to uncover a mystery. Instead, we woke something that never truly slept. The first to vanish was Mia. She'd wandered off just before sunrise, said she couldn't sleep. Something about the way the howls echoed down the valley made her feel watched, like someone was pacing just outside her tent. She said she wanted to clear her head. She left with a flashlight and her journal. We found the journal, not Mia. It lay open near the trailhead spine, broken pages damp with morning dew, except one. The last page was dry and written in something that wasn't ink. 4 words carved deep into the paper, as though by a blade. "It wears her now." Nate read it aloud, and something in the trees shifted, softly, like leaves disturbed, not by wind, but by breath. We didn't speak for a while, not really, just kept close, watched the sky, waited for the moon to rise, because that's when the howling came, never before moonrise, never during the day, always when the ridge was drowned in silver. The second night it came closer. I was lying in my tent, eyes wide, flashlight clenched in my fist. The sound rose like steam from the mountain, low, trembling, hollow, but it wasn't a call, not really. It was an answer. Something was being fed. Ella whispered to me through the thin nylon, "It's not calling for us, it's waiting." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew, because deep in my gut, beneath the panic and cold and disbelief, I felt it too. Not fear, recognition. We didn't talk about it the next morning, not directly. There were too many silences in our eyes, too many glances toward the trees that ended without focus. We just knew. Nate tried to keep morale up. He talked louder, cracked jokes that no one laughed at. He built a fire before sunset, a big one, too big, like it could ward something off just by being hot enough. We all sat close that night, backs turned inward, watching the tree line, James finally asked the question out loud. What if it's not just a sound? None of us answered, but Rachel did something strange then. She pulled a photo from her pocket, creased, water damaged, showed it to me under the firelight. 7 kids, campers, smiling. One of them was Mia. She'd never been in the photo before. I stared at it until the fire burned out in my eyes. I found it in the counselor shed, Rachel said, dated 1981. That's when I noticed the signature on the back. Wendigo Ridge. Final session. Final. As in the year they shut the camp down. Before it reopened. Before we were hired. Before anyone told us why it had really closed. That night, the howling didn't come from the ridge. It came from behind cabin 3, closer than it had ever been. And when we ran out to see it, flashlights cutting through fog, we saw the shape. Not a figure, a shadow walking between trees, antlers, arms too long, and behind it, dragging on the ground, Mia's flashlight. Still on. Nate picked up the flashlight. It was warm. Not from the batteries, from something else. His hands shook as he held it, the beam flickering weakly in the fog, illuminating nothing but dust and dew. He didn't speak. None of us did. Not until Rachel stepped forward, looking past the trees, her voice quiet. It didn't take her. It changed her. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I swore her pupils were wrong, not round, elongated like slits. But it was just the firelight, I told myself. Just the fear. We made a decision that night. Maybe it was desperation, maybe madness. But we couldn't stay in the clearing. The howls were circling us now like a spiral, tightening, squeezing something ancient from the dirt. So we followed the map, the one with the red spiral and the warning, "Do not enter." The trail was half buried, more suggestion than path, marked only by broken stones and the occasional bone. At one point, we found a tree with a rope swing still tied to its limb, swaying gently despite the still air. Beneath it, a pair of shoes, child-sized, pointed into the woods. We kept walking. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Not just no birds, not just no bugs, no wind, no heartbeat. The silence was alive. It felt like stepping into a lung after it had exhaled. And in that dead breath, I heard something new. A voice, low, familiar. My name spoken like it had been buried in the ground and clawed its way out. Daniel. I turned, and James was gone. At first, I thought he'd just slipped behind a tree. Maybe he'd dropped back, lost footing, fallen behind us in the fog. But the path hadn't turned, and James had been right beside me, just gone. I called out. Once, twice, my voice barely made it past my teeth. The air didn't carry sound anymore. It swallowed it. We turned back to look, me, Nate, Ella, and Rachel, and that's when we saw the trail was gone too. Not covered, not overgrown, erased, like the woods had never been parted, like we'd never walked here at all. That's when Ella whispered it, like the words had been waiting in her throat all along. It's moving us. She knelt, ran her fingers through the dirt. No roots, no leaves, just patterns, circles, spirals, deep grooves like something had crawled here, dragging long limbs behind it. She looked up at me, and I saw it again in her eyes. That flicker, that hollow. I started counting us over and over in my head. 7, then 6, now 5. But even then, the numbers didn't feel right. It felt like we'd always been one less than we remembered, like something had always been missing or hiding. Rachel clutched the old photo again, but now there were 8 people in the image, 8 campers. One of them was James. The others, the faces were wrong, stretched, pale, smiling too wide, and standing behind them, taller than any child, was something with antlers, its hands resting gently on their shoulders like a counselor posing with their kids. Rachel dropped the photo, and from somewhere deep in the woods, the howling started again. But this time, it didn't rise. It fell, lower, heavier, and it was inside us. It vibrated through our ribs like a tuning fork, low and thunderless, more felt than heard. Nate dropped to his knees, hands clamped over his ears, eyes wide and glassy. "It's not a sound," he gasped. "It's a signal." Ella stumbled backward, tripping over a root that hadn't been there a moment before. The ground felt soft. Soft beneath us, like skin. Rachel turned and ran. No warning, no shout, just raw instinct. Her flashlight beam bobbed in the trees for 2 seconds before vanishing entirely. Nate bolted after her. Ella and I followed. We didn't think. We couldn't. It was like being pulled by a string from inside your own spine. But no matter how fast we moved, we didn't catch her. The trail bent wrong, folded in on itself, like the woods were a throat, swallowing her. When we finally stopped, the fog thick as oil, we were alone again. 3 now. I reached for my pack, trying to orient myself to look for a compass, or map, or anything, but I froze because Rachel's photo was in my jacket pocket. I didn't put it there. I unfolded it. 9 now. 9 faces. One of them was mine. And behind us, looming like a shadow stretched by time, was that same impossible figure. Antlers like split bone. No eyes, just darkness. And in its chest, just beneath the skin, I could see mouths, dozens of them, opening, closing, all whispering the same thing in voices we knew. "Stay." Ella screamed, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. She turned to me, voice shaking, mouth trembling. "It's wearing them." I didn't ask who she meant, because I knew. And behind us, the woods exhaled, and the howl began again. Ella collapsed, not fainting, folding like something inside her had broken in a way bones couldn't explain. She dropped to her knees, hands clutching her temples, and let out a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a scream, it was something deeper. A sound made when your mind bends around something it was never built to understand. I pulled her up, but her eyes weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, like I was already gone. Nate reached us seconds later, wild-eyed, breathless. "She's ahead," he gasped. I saw Rachel. She was walking, but wrong, like her bones didn't fit her skin. We stood there, the 3 of us, in the middle of a forest that shifted every time we blinked. The trees leaned in closer now, like they were listening, or waiting. I held up the photo again. 10. Now 10 people in the frame. Nate was next to me in the picture, smiling, with his arm around a face I didn't recognize. And right behind him, almost hidden in the tree line, was the thing. Half in shadow, half in flesh, watching, smiling with no mouth. Ella took the photo from me and turned it over. There was writing now, not handwritten, carved, pressed deep into the paper like it had been branded. "You are the memory." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We were never looking for it," she said. "We were walking into it." Then she took off running, gone in an instant. Nate screamed after her. I chased, but the woods devoured her flashlight within seconds. And then there were 2. Nate and I stood at the edge of a clearing we didn't remember approaching. There was a circle of stones, and in the center, the photo, resting in a pool of blood that hadn't soaked the ground. Just sat there like the earth refused to drink it. The howling returned, but this time it had words, and it said my name. I didn't move, not at first. My name shouldn't echo like that, bent by wind that wasn't there, stretched and frayed like something chewing on the sound of it. Nate stepped forward, breathing hard, eyes darting through the clearing. "We need to go," he whispered, but he said it like a prayer, not a plan. Because there was nowhere left to go. The forest wasn't letting us leave. It had led us here, not to a trail, not to safety, to this, to the memory. Nate reached for the photo in the blood. The moment his fingers touched it, his whole body snapped backward, lifted like something yanked him by the spine. He screamed once, cut short, dropped to the ground with a sound like meat hitting stone. His eyes blinked once, then went still. And from the center of the clearing, the blood began to rise. Not boil, rise, shaping itself, stretching upward into something tall, something thin, a form made of shadow and bone, and dripping red memory. Its antlers were wrong too many points, spiraling, pulsing like nerves. It looked at me. I felt it in my lungs, in my skin, like every part of me was being unwritten. And then it spoke, not aloud, inside me. You were always here. I opened my mouth to scream, but what came out was a howl, low, long, familiar. My voice, my hands dropped to my sides, my legs gave in. I sank to my knees in the cold moss. The figure stepped forward, placed its hand on my shoulder, and I smiled, because I remembered who I was. I was the first to come here, and now I would not be the last. The forest accepted me, not like a home accepts its child, but like a grave accepts the body. It was always meant to hold. There was no pain, only exchange. Memory for silence, name for shape. I felt my limbs stretch not physically, but conceptually, like my presence was no longer contained by skin or voice. I became part of it. The hollow, the spiral, the mouth beneath Wendigo Ridge. And as I changed, I saw them, the others. Not faces, not souls, impressions. Trapped moments, still echoing. Rachel, reaching toward the trees with fingers too long. Ella curled beneath roots, humming the tune of her own name. Nate suspended mid-scream. Frozen in the moment, the truth split him open. They had not disappeared. They had been remembered. The Wendigo does not kill. It holds, preserves, consumes the way grief consumes the living, slowly, lovingly, with repetition. The howls are not warnings, they are invitations. And now they come from me, because this is what the mountain makes of those who enter without forgetting. It turns them into stories, and I am the newest one. Next July, campers will return. They always do. The signs will be repainted, the trails relit, the old map will resurface. And when the first one hears the howl echo from the ridge, when they wake and wander into the dark to find what calls their name, I'll be waiting. Not with claws, not with teeth, but with memory. Even now, if you listen closely, you might hear me whisper your name. If you heard the Wendigo's call, like this video. If its shadow followed you past the screen, subscribe to True Ghost Vault and step deeper into the stories it doesn't want forgotten. New horrors arrive soon, and the next voice it copies could be yours. Turn on notifications, because once the Wendigo remembers you, it never lets go.